How in the Hell Did We Get Here? With John Zink is brought to you by IT Avalon. Visit our sponsor at itavalon.com. Now, here's John Zink.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the How in the Hell Did We Get Here podcast. This is episode number 43. I'm your host, John Zink, and today I've got the great pleasure of being joined by Mr. John Pomposello. Did I pronounce it correctly, John?
100%. Thank you.
Perfect. Now, John is the Senior Vice President of Network Advisory Services for CBRE. For anybody living under a rock, can you fill us in on CBRE?
I mean, most people identify with CBRE as commercial real estate. So right out of the gate, they see CBRE on buildings and they think we own a lot of buildings. And we do own a lot of buildings. Our core focus is everything real estate, from raising money, building buildings, filling buildings, managing buildings, and this is across all asset classes. What I do within CBRE is pretty interesting. I help clients understand the technology they're consuming. So earlier on, CBRE said, if we're a commercial real estate company and we're helping out clients with every aspect of commercial real estate, why are we not helping them understand and optimize the technology they're using? And I joke around with people. There's very few companies you walk into today where there's ashtrays on the desks and typewriters. It doesn't exist. So technology is sort of the central nervous system. And that's what I focus on.
Yeah, no more ashtrays on the desks.
There's no more ashtrays. No. If you walk into those really old buildings, sometimes you see them by the elevators, but that's even becoming a relic of the past.
So my background is I own an IT staffing company. And when I first started in the business, I was living outside in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and worked in this company where it was just like a sweatshop, pretty much like boiler room type thing.
Yes.
You don't want this job, get the hell out. Somebody else will sit in here, right?
Yes. Second place is steak knives.
That's right. So there was a couple of older guys that were financial advisors across the way from our office, and they both smoked in their office. This is like pre-Y2K. So yes. I smoked cigarettes at the time, so I would always walk over there to their office and puff on a heater real quick, and I didn't have to go outside and freeze in the Minneapolis winter.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's in my journey, which is interesting, I've been very fortunate to start out really pre-technology, and to see where it's gone to today is amazing. And I don't think a lot of people get to experience that in their careers, where you almost really get to see it from inception to where it is today. And I joke around, on one hand, we live in one of the most technologically advanced societies, but I say, when you fast forward into the future, they're going to look at us like we're dinosaurs. I'm like, oh my God, like they did this podcast on this one-dimensional Zooms. They weren't in this immersive virtual world. That's so archaic.
Well, I had the blessing of doing the same thing. So when I started as a technical recruiter, I was a musician playing in bands, and I delivered pizzas. That's all I did prior to starting this career in technical recruiting. And when I went into it, they hired me as 100% commission. There was no salary. And it was pretty much, throw enough shit against the wall till something sticks. And I stuck. And there was no computers on the desk. It was pretty much just a big day planner. And you filled out your 50 calls you're going to make in the morning and your 50 calls you're going to make in the afternoon. And that's what you did. And they beat it into your head. And it was the greatest training ground anybody could have. Because then fast forward, like you're talking about, fast forward to today when we have all of these tools, and I watch people that, work for me now that don't understand that old way of thinking.
Right.
And if you're able to implement that old way of thinking with all these new tools, I tell these people, you can be unstoppable if you just marry the two.
I listen, not only do I agree with it, I use this analogy. I'm a little bit of a Star Wars fan. I'm not a huge Star Wars. I don't dress up to see the movies. I'll put it that way. I'm a little bit of a Star Wars fan. But, in one of the movies, they talked about the Jedi was this dying culture, this dying breed. And I feel like that's what we're talking about. And the irony of it is, I literally just did an interview earlier this morning, and one of the guys said, what does it take to be successful? And we went through some of the metrics. And I said, organization is key. And I remember when I was living in the world that you're talking about right now, you had to figure out a way with paper to say, how do I stay really organized with my follow-ups and things like that? So when you get into today's world, if you have that fundamental system, you're able to be very organized, not get lost in just this ocean of technology and apps. Because everyone thinks an app is going to solve it, AI is going to solve it. I'm like, no, it's the human approach. AI and an app is never going to replace the human approach. And people say, well, why is that? I go, because humans make decisions based on emotions, and they need to connect with other humans. All that other stuff is going to help you be organized. And if you don't know how to use it, you're not going to get there. And then the other thing that you and I lived with is we had to figure out, because I remember when I started out, I sound like an old man. When I started out way back when, for me, the holy grail was, I'm like, oh my God, I got a Boston Business Journal book of lists. Cause at the time I was involved, like, to me, that was the holy grail. And I had to cold call in and social engineer and figure out how to get to the people. And today you've got all this other stuff, but I'm like, I tell everybody, I'm like, I was successful in my early days because I knew how to bang the phone like a stockbroker. And then when I got somebody on the phone, really mirror and connect with them in the few seconds that you have to try to get something. That's really, that's the art that's kind of getting a little bit lost.
Well, here's a fun one for you. I totally agree with all that. So I grew up in a really small town in Northwest Illinois, 1,200, 1,300 people. And my dad was just a social butterfly, and he taught me to be the same way. I'm an only child, so it's just like I was with my dad and my mom all the time. And it was always, he always made a joke, always wave and talk to everybody because you'll never know when you'll have to run for mayor. And a mayor of a small town doesn't get paid anything, right? It's just, that political position that you can go out and help people. And that's really all a mayor of a small town does. And that was always instilled in me, that I have to talk to everybody. I have to network before I even knew what networking was, and make those connections and build those relationships with everybody. Just like you're talking about, getting somebody on the phone and getting them to want to talk to you for more than 3 or 4 seconds before they hang up on you is an art form. And many people have no clue how to do it, or they're frightened to do it.
Yes. And I also, you have to be careful from an HR standpoint. I also equate sales, and what we do, my end of the world is complex sales. And if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it. But this is an interesting topic to stay on for the moment. I often relate this to the art of dating. And what I mean by that is, younger people, I'm happily married, but younger people today, they get on an app and they're swiping all over the place. I'm like, I had to go and walk into a pack of female wolves and have game. And you got shot down a lot. And that's the art of sales as well. And I relate that all the time, where that is getting a little lost, and people are hiding behind apps, and they think you could do $1 million deals over Facebook, and you can't.
Right. It's still all about building the relationship, building the trust of the other people to want to work with you, whether it's in a relationship, with with a woman, a man, whatever it is, or a business relationship. It's all the same.
That's right. That's right. And the other piece of it is, which I'm finding is, one of the questions when your organization sent me a form and they said, hey, fill out some of this stuff. And ironically, I bring up comedians a lot, and I say comedians have mastered the tone, tempo, and how they communicate. So a comedian will take an idea that we're all familiar with, and they distill it down to the fewest amount of words that trigger feelings and emotions. And I love that. And I find today people, if they are able to make the connection, don't realize you don't jump to the punchline of the joke. You have to go through the process the way the comedian does, or the way the magician does. And timing. So it's not only what you say, when you say it, how you say it, the tempo of your saying it, all is a piece of it.
Well, I was so interested in the comedians that you listed on that questionnaire that everybody fills out on this podcast. So George Carlin, I mean, the one of the artists of the art form, you know,
Yes.
and just I still watch a bunch of his stuff. I loved Norm Macdonald before he passed, and then
Yes.
I just happened to be lucky enough to be next door neighbors in California with Gary Owen,
Oh, okay.
and just one of the funniest human beings ever. And it's like just sitting down with him, but then Jim Gaffigan too. That the art form of delivering the joke,
Yes.
and then turning up a mirror at society and going, "Look how foolish you are."
And and again, what I'm looking at comedians as just masters of communications, and then what I do is I break it down and I say, look, there's some really funny comedians that use vulgarity, and I'm not opposed to that at all. You know, in my personal life, I'm really trying to not curse at all. It's difficult.
I'll try to follow your lead.
Right. But then there's the comedians that can do it without vulgarity, and I put them in another class because what they have to do is they really have to sharpen their senses in the saw on really getting to that emotion with even less words to choose from.
Well, Bill Cosby, before he got in all the trouble, I mean, he was the master of that.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, Bill Cosby himself was one of the funniest things ever. You know, when he never swore ever.
Right.
But then you got
Right.
Eddie Murphy, who swore all the time, who was also a master.
Yes. Yeah. And like I said, it relates to sales because there's nothing that anybody, I shouldn't say there's nothing, there's very few people out there that are trying to get the mind share of a potential client, and there's a lot of competition. So you have to sound, look, act, and be different. Because the comedian's telling you what you already know. Jerry Seinfeld's pointing out the obvious. They're doing it in a different way. And you're like, this guy's really funny.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay $500 to go and see him at a show.
What's up with these airlines? You know? So
Exactly.
we'll talk about some of your personal stuff in a second, but I was just thinking when you were talking about making people laugh. And that's one of the things that whenever I go into a business meeting with a potential client or a client, I just try to break the ice with something because everybody is so serious all day long, and life is not that serious. No matter what it is we're dealing with, I just try to get somebody to break the ice and laugh a little bit so we can talk about some personal stuff for a second, have some laughs, and then get into the business later on. And I think it's so important to build rapport with other people to get them laughing.
I agree, but I definitely call it the human connection. And I also, when I talk to individuals, I'm also saying you have to have a heightened sense of awareness to understand where the other person is. Some people like that, some people don't like that. So you have to quickly identify, is this enough? And then more importantly, what I say is in today's world, the technology has forced everyone to have some level of attention deficit disorder. So you need to keep them from changing the channel, so to speak. And that's why you want to be interesting, informative, educational, appeal to their self-interest, be brief, and move on. Like, don't stay in one spot too long.
When you have to read the room.
Yeah.
Know who you're dealing with. You know, take a look around at take a look at the surroundings and take a look at the person and read the room, say a couple things, and then you know where you're going. I wrote a book a couple years ago, and I've got one of the chapters in there called The Chameleon. And it's very much, you have to be a chameleon in every part of life, like you're talking about before, whether it's finding a mate, business, whatever it is. You have to read the room and be a chameleon to fit into with whoever you're talking to.
Well, you want to be careful when you're finding a mate because then you might say, I don't want to be this chameleon anymore and I'm married. So you for that one, you want to really show your true colors a little bit more so you find the right person. But I agree
Well,
with everything else.
the first meeting might be different than the second meeting.
That's right. That's that.
Let me ask you about, because I told you before, well, first of all, let me get back to a second. You've got an MBA from Northeastern University.
Yes,
Right now you live in Boston, Mass.
I do.
Born in Long Island, New York. I wanted to ask you about this. I was born and raised in a very small town in Northwest Illinois. What was it like for you growing up in Long Island?
I'm going to share a quick story with you and then I'm going to answer that and it all ties in. When the pandemic happened, every single day and everyone was working out of the house, I would take a shower, shave, and put cologne on. And my wife would say, John, you're not leaving the house. Why are you wearing cologne? And I said, my dear love, I am from Long Island. I don't think you understand this type of person that I am. So Long Island is a very interesting culture of individuals. It's, right outside of Manhattan. So it's got that in your face type of person. I think there's a certain level of cheesiness, if that word still exists. But Long Island does produce some of the most successful people in sales. If you look at, right, wrong, or indifferent, The Wolf of Wall Street came out of Long Island. You've got some high end individuals that came out of Long Island, and I think there's a lot of if you could survive on the island, you could survive out there in the world.
That's awesome. Yeah, I grew up in Northwest Illinois, close enough to Chicago, but far enough away to be completely different. When I moved to the West Coast, I found that everybody on the West Coast is completely different from Chicago and the East Coast. Very straightforward. You're going to get what you get. I'm going to tell you how it is. And it's a little bit more of a dance on the West Coast and a little bit more passive. Do you find the same thing? Because you've worked with people all over the world.
I work with people all over the world. It took me a while to realize Long Island is a certain type of a person. And ironically, I had a meeting in New York not too long ago. And I love dealing with the guy in New York because they're so straightforward. You're in the meeting. It's like, you talk. Why are you here? I got it. Next. You. What are you doing? I like this. I don't like that. I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about that. Like New Yorkers just say how it is. Where in other places you have to, do other things. So it's an interesting culture. Not only is there cultures around the world that you have to identify with, you also have to identify with subcultures. And that happens all the time. And then you have to identify with the cultures within the corporations you work with. So when people say, what's the culture like at CBRE or what's the culture like here? That's not, are you business formal or not? It's there's certain dynamics and you have to quickly understand how those work. And you really need to mirror the culture that's there because people naturally feel more comfortable with people that sound and look and act like them.
Yeah,
that's why if people are suited up, you suit up. If people are casual, you're casual. If people talk fast, you talk fast. If people are real calm, you're real calm.
Right. And but at the same time, you also have to be yourself. So while I say before, like in the book, I said you have to be a chameleon up to a certain point. You're not going to please all the people all the time, and it's just like you also have to buy into the notion that guess what? Not everybody's going to buy what you're selling, so.
In fact, I'll share this with you. One of the questions that candidate told me earlier, when he said, what makes people successful and not successful? I go, one of the key things where people fail is they don't know how to properly identify a qualified opportunity. He goes, well, what do you mean? I go, there's a lot of people that are interested in what you're saying, but they have no intention on taking action. And successful sales reps know how to find somebody that has a problem they can solve, that person's interested and willing to take action. And if they're not willing to take action and they're interested, you're going to waste a lot of time playing golf or taking them out to lunch and saying, this is great, we're building a relationship, and it's not going anywhere.
Earlier in my career, I wasted so much time on different people before I had a mentor tell me, listen, move on.
Yep. Yep.
So back in the early days, what did your parents do for a living?
Um, I mean, really diverse background. My parents were divorced when I was very young. My dad was a retired New York City cop, moved out into the West Coast, and then he started doing writing and some technical advising work for TV shows on how actors can actually act like cops, and always did side hustles of bricklaying and construction work. And my mom, really interesting career, started out as a nurse, got involved with healthcare. Because of my parents' divorce, my grandparents were very influential in raising me. My grandfather owned a butcher shop. My aunts and I feel like I was raised tribal fashion. My aunts and uncles all participated, which was great because I had a lot of diversity. I would have, one family member that was corporate America, and then I'd have another family member that was more construction and blue collar. And I was fortunate enough to kind of get the best and a cross section from all individuals.
That's cool. It's very much like my upbringing as an only child. I hung out with my cousins all the time and my aunts
Yes,
and
some of my
uncles and
cousins are like
everybody.
my best friends.
Oh yeah, my cousins were just like my siblings because I didn't have any
Right.
siblings. It's like I always
Yes.
remember whenever we'd go home, I'd start crying because I didn't want to go home because all my fun was had at aunts and uncles and grandma and grandpa's houses, and going home was just me.
Oh, so in Long Island, because it's so tight, the entire family lived within like a 5 block radius. So, so when I say I was raised within the tribe, I was raised within the tribe.
Well, that's interesting because I think I had the drummer from Hall and Oates was on the podcast a year or so ago, and he grew up in New Jersey, and he said the same
Okay.
thing. It's like his whole family was all like within a block, and they're still all within like 2 or 3 blocks from each other to this day. So it
Mhm.
kind of sounds like that's a pretty normal thing for up there.
Well, and then just where I live, for whatever reason, on the block that I live, there was a lot of my friends came from divorced families. So it was a lot of single moms raising kids. And what I realized was if I did something wrong, I could get reprimanded from that person's mom or this. It was like it really was the community watched the kids.
Yeah.
And somehow, and this was before all technology, I somehow had the spider senses where at 6 o'clock I would hear a voice from miles away. I'm like, I got to get home. I'm going to be in trouble if I don't go home
Well, the
now.
street lights would come on.
Yeah, something would happen. It was just like the signal. I'm like, I got to get home or I'm in trouble right now.
Okay, so let's go back to those days. When I was growing up, I didn't see myself as being the owner of an IT staffing company. I wanted to be a fireman. I wanted to
Right.
ride in the back of a garbage truck. What did you
Yeah.
want to do when you were a kid?
I this is hilarious, and I actually had to write. I wrote this in my my application to Northeastern. I remember when I was a kid, I would say all the time, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, but I want to wear a suit and I want to have a briefcase. That was all I knew when I was a kid.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to wear a suit and I want a briefcase.
Dreams do come true.
And the irony of it is, I wore suits for a million years, and I feel like after COVID, we do live in this great environment, which I love now, where it's a little bit more casual. So uh, I don't like wearing suits anymore.
That's awesome. Yeah, you get. I come in like this in a polo and some jeans, and every once in a while I'll go out and meet with a banker or someone at one of our clients that I got to dress up a little bit. And dressing up a little bit now is putting on some khakis. It's like even in the banking world.
Right. I feel like so when back to culture and stuff, what I feel like is acceptable today across almost all businesses I mean, I can't speak for females, that's a whole different thing. But for men, as long as you're wearing shoes, dark jeans or khakis, a button down, maybe a sports coat, you're never going to be offensive to anybody.
Yeah.
That's sort of the new way of going. But I also think we live in an incredibly sensitive world where anyone could identify as anything. So no one's going to be like, you're not dressed up for. Like I remember starting out in life where if you didn't dress right, they'd be like, you can't come into the office.
Oh no, that first position I was in, 100% commission, it was suit and tie every day.
And you weren't allowed to take your jacket. I remember being in positions where men were not allowed to take their jacket off. You had to have your suit on all the time. Like
Yeah.
when you're making the suit on all the time.
Yeah. It was crazy just looking back on those days. And I'm still best friends with some of those guys because we just tore it up and started making the first real money of our lives. The first time I made $100,000 in a year, I went from the year before making $10,000, delivered pizzas and playing music, to the next year making $100,000. I'm like, I've arrived, and it was pretty
Right.
crazy. And all of us guys went through that together.
Yes. Yeah. There is, um, at this point in the career, it's ironic. I literally live right in Boston. One of our offices is right in Boston. I could practically see it from the window I'm in right now. And I'm on so many back-to-back calls. I'm working out of the house a lot. But for younger people, and I don't know what the world is like today, there was an amazing experience of being together, banging the phones, going to grab a beer after work. It was a very fraternal type of feeling.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I'm best friends with a bunch of those guys. As I'm sure you are with some of the guys that you came up with. And it's
Yes.
like getting together and telling those old war stories and just
Yes.
laughing and having fun. And then, almost like we're doing on this podcast, talking about the triumphs, talking about the pitfalls, talking about the divorces, talking about the marriages, talking about everything that we went through. It's such a fun time to look back on it and, relive some of those old glory days.
Yes. Yes.
So what did every person who's on this podcast is driven?
Mhm.
What drove you from an early age?
I think I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but coming from a divorced family and my mom having to move in with her parents, I was always very financially driven. I always looked at the more you earn, the more security there is. I know money can't buy happiness, but it certainly can help. So for me, I always related to money as security, and that's why I always wanted to work and earn as much as I could. As I developed in life, I realized money is incredibly important, but you also need to be in a position that you're learning and you're not becoming a dinosaur that you're going to be prevented from making money in the future. And then in between both of those things, you have to make sure the organization you're working with really meets your value system in life. So that's where I am now in life, for those three. But I started out very, very money focused.
So when did you realize that you wanted to be a leader?
I will share another realistic, embarrassing story with you. So when I started out, like in life, started out as an individual contributor. I was really good at first I was bad at everything. Then you get really good at banging the phones and setting up appointments, but you don't know how to run a meeting. Then you get good at setting the appointments, running the meetings, but you don't know how to go through the process and closing. You go through all of that. And I remember saying, I want to be a manager, and I want to be a manager because I want an office. So I wanted an office, and I admit that more now than I used to, was the number one motivation of being a manager. And then the ironic thing was, I said, when I become a manager, I'm never going to do all this shit that my manager's doing to me. It's sort of like being a parent. You become a manager, you're like, I'm now doing everything that my manager was doing because I didn't understand the world he lived in. So I probably got into leadership for the wrong things. I've now been in leadership a lot longer than an individual contributor. I stay very mindful of being focused on being close to the individual contributors. And a manager today it's much more difficult than people think, because I had another rep come into my office at one point in my career, and he says to me, he goes, "Hey, John, I was getting promoted." He goes, how do I get your job? I go, okay. I go, you want to be a director? He goes, yeah. I go, okay. I go, well, you realize that my top reps make more than I do. And, that's when you first get the weird look. And then I go, by the way, I have to work more out. Like, I'm the guy working all weekend to make sure the Monday morning meetings, and I'm here all the time for all the reps. So he's like, wait a minute, you make less money and work more hours. He's like, why the hell are you doing this? I'm like, well, I'm doing this because I want to be a CEO of a company, and this is what you have to do. Um, and I realize now the world needs good individual contributors, and the world needs good managers to help out those individual contributors. And if you want to equate it to sports, you need good athletes on the field, and you need good coaches watching the game from the sidelines. And they need to exist, because when you're on the field, you're going to lose sight of the trees in the forest, and when you're just on the sidelines and you're not in the game, you're going to lose other perspectives. So you really need each other.
That's awesome. I love the fact that you talk about, well, first I did it for the money, then I did it for the office. And it's so true, because you don't know what you don't know. When you're coming up from the bottom, you have no clue. You know, it's like I'm sitting here today, you know, my wife and I started this IT staffing company, IT Avalon, 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I had no clue. You know, when I first started, I didn't know that I had to have insurance. I didn't know that I had to have money to payroll. You know, it's like all these things you learn along the way.
Right.
Now I know them all, but I still learn something every day about something new that I didn't know the day prior. And that's the fun part about what I do, is the learning. And if I go back to when I was a student, and I was a horrible student, I didn't take the time to listen to anybody because I thought I knew it all, or I didn't give them the time to listen to what these sages knew. And it's like, once I got into this business where I had to learn, the knowledge is everything. And just going through and learning these things and then passing the knowledge on to other people on your team to make the team and the company better is everything. And it's like, if I knew then what I know now, you know, that old adage, my God, the money I'd have, the more hair I would have, you know, it's just like all those things.
Well, there's two really, really important things that you said there. One is, if you surround yourself with the right people, the universe is going to give you all the answers. You need to listen loudly. You need to shut down the voices in your head, and because most people are thinking about, what am I going to say? You need to listen loudly. You need to get your ego to shut up so you could take that advice. And then to your point, you know, back to when we were talking about being the comedian, you have to be able to distill this and then pass the knowledge as efficiently as possible. Because you can't, if you want to grow, you know, here's my leadership style. My leadership style is, I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can in every role that I'm managing. And my expectation is everybody that reports to me needs to be better than me. So that's like how I want to set the bar. They can call bullshit on me, and they do. And I can call bullshit on them, and I do. Like, that's how I manage. And my other feeling of management is, I'm only successful if my team is successful. So I make a small percentage of what the team makes. So I have to make sure when someone says, what's your purpose in life? And it took me a long time to get here. My management style and purpose is to help people hit levels of success, reach levels of achievement they never thought possible. And if I can do that, not only do they benefit, but I benefit indirectly because they work for me.
Well,
so that's sort of how this style works.
There was a guy named Jeff Boulay. It was my first job back in Minneapolis. And like I said, I barely made it out of high school. You know, I was a musician. I loved music programs. I loved all that kind of stuff. But there's a couple of teachers I had to beg. I'm like, please, you don't want me back. I don't want to come back. Just pass me.
Yes.
And I got out and I got my diploma. And then college was not what I was going to do. So Jeff Boulay was the top guy at this company called Paragon Search and Selection that I went and worked at. And I'll be honest, I was very weary of talking to people like you who had an MBA or a PhD or somebody. It's like, what am I going to add to this person's life that is of any value?
Right.
And Jeff pulled me aside and go, listen, they need you just as much as you need them. They are technology executives or managers who are trying to find people. You are the intermediary who's going to hook them up with the right technologists for these positions. You need each other. This is very symbiotic. And it just opened up my eyes to, oh, I can talk to these people because I have something to offer.
Well, not only, I mean, look, when you're younger, you hear things, and when you get older, you understand things. So when people say, you and I are the same, we both put our pants on one leg at a time, and we've heard that before.
Yeah.
It's taken me a long time to here's the MBA. Here's what I tell everybody for an MBA, because Northeastern used to have me talk to people about getting an MBA. I say, you can get all the knowledge of an MBA online. That's fact. People who don't have an MBA somehow assume people with an MBA are smarter than them. That's not the case at all. That's not the case at all. And to your point, everybody is the same at the core. I mean, I had a meeting with a guy who runs a private equity company. And I always joke around. I'm like, there's a couple different type of people in this world. There's people like me that have to show up at the airport at a certain time because my plane's going to take off. And then there's the people that tell the pilot when to take off because they're flying private. There's two types of people in this world.
Right.
So this guy, in gazillionaire, right, runs a huge private equity company. And at the end of the day, I realize we are all the same. He's like, John, I'm a little bit older than you. We both get up twice a night to take a leak because that's where we are. My wife's driving me crazy with this. I'm doing this with my kids. I'm doing this with work. So whether you're making 100,000, 500,000, 500 million, it's all the same stuff. It's all the same. And once you realize that, you're able to get to that point that you were able to get to, that everybody needs everyone to get to where they are.
Yeah.
But you better be able to show value real quickly. That's how we started this out. So the way to get to pitch these people and talk to them is you're like, look, I know your world. Here's what you're going through. Here's what I can do. Do I have your attention for a little more time? Yes. Do I have your attention for a 20-minute meeting? Yes. Did I pique your interest for a meeting where I'll fly to New York? Yes. You have to go through that process.
Well, you've had mentors. I had people like Jeff Boulay and some other people as mentors of mine. Who are some of the most important mentors in your life and in your career?
Oh my
and
God.
why?
I've had, I don't want to say names because I don't want to,
Sure.
just because I don't want to offend people or things like that. Different mentors taught me different things along the journey. So I had some incredible mentors that taught me about business. I had incredible mentors that taught me about leadership. So, some mentors can teach you how to be an individual contributor, how to manage up, how to work your business. And then it's very different when you have to have mentors that teach you, how do I manage people, or how do I manage people that manage people? That's a whole different process. And I also realize in today's world, and this is crazy to say, not only have I had some mentors that have been in my life that I've worked with, but I've had some people that I've learned so much from, and I've never even met them, through podcasts and audiobooks. I mean, we do live in a world where you are the sum total of what you surround yourself with, and there is no excuse for anybody in today's world. I mean, if you have an iPhone and access to the internet, you can surround yourself with some incredible people through audiobooks and podcasts, even if you live in a remote part of the country.
It's an amazing point, because when I first started my company, I had one of my consultants. I had maybe like 5 or 6 people working for me at the time. This guy, Harry, goes, Johnny Z, listen, you got to listen to this guy, Grant Cardone. And he goes, it's going to be perfect for you. It's all about 10X. So I get the audiobook, and I was hooked on that audiobook for like 2 years
of
starting the company. And, we'll talk about some of your favorite books here in a second, but still to this day, the 10X rule is one of my favorite books, just because it helped me jumpstart this company that is so important to me and my wife and our family and our employees. And it's just like, I go back to, just off of what you said, remembering driving everywhere to my appointments and listen to 10X and getting pumped up the whole time. Like, I'm going to go in and slay this meeting,
Yes.
I love it. And it's just having all that knowledge at your fingertips and at your your earlobes is just so awesome today that we didn't have years ago.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I ironically, so I'll give you a little bit of you're talking about school. I mean, I grew up, I was branded dyslexic when I was younger. I don't even know if that's right or not. Maybe I just didn't learn the fundamentals at the right stages. But I remember I was just such a slow reader. I somehow discovered there was audiobooks for blind kids. This was like before anything else. So I was like, oh my God. So it was like cassettes. So it was like a briefcase full of cassettes. And I'd be like, all right, I can listen to these books faster than I could read them. So,
I wish I
that
would
was
have
my
done that. I'm such a horrible slow reader.
I don't know. I must have been in the library or something. I'm like, what's that? They're like, oh, that's for the blind kids. I'm like, what is it, Braille? They're like, no, it's audio. I'm like, how do I get my hands on that?
That's great. I didn't even know that
Yeah.
existed back then because I
Right.
was the same way. I listen to audiobooks and podcasts everywhere I go because it's just like I love like I said, I'm a musician. I listen to music all the time. I got a drum set
Mhm.
sitting here in my office. I love music, but like driving around somewhere, I'd rather have somebody feeding knowledge into my ears and my brain so I can learn something and be interested and I don't get tired. It's like when I'm actually learning something and intrigued by what I'm hearing, I don't get tired while I'm driving.
Yeah, it does take a little bit of mental discipline to pay attention a little bit, right? Because you don't want to just like drift off. Um, and I'm the type of person where there's certain audio books I have to pay attention, and then I can just go to like fluff stuff where it's like, oh, here's the autobiography of Tom Petty or something, which is cool, and I can listen to that with less intensity. So you have to sort of listen to things in different areas, in different ways.
So what's happening at CBRE today? Any new projects or anything exciting you can talk about?
Um, yeah, so high level, I'll talk about the company holistically to the best of my ability, and then I can really talk about more of my world. But we do have some of the brightest people in the world. Everyone is hyper aware that commercial real estate is changing. So at one time, everybody, like we were saying, worked in the office. Um, there's a huge transformation of how people live, work, and play that directly correlates to real estate. It also directly correlates to the global economy because if buildings aren't filled, people are defaulting, cities aren't getting tax dollars. So, the post-COVID world is very interesting. CBRE does an amazing job of helping companies out in a multitude of ways, from just advisory to outsourcing and the investment side. In my world of helping clients understand what's the technology they have in place and how do you optimize it, it's been, I don't want to say COVID was a good thing. That's a horrible thing to say, but COVID really accelerated the inevitable, and it's forcing everybody to use the technology that's here today. So people today are realizing you cannot operate, innovate, or differentiate without your technology platform. So for me, it's an incredible time in life.
Going to clients prior to the pandemic as an IT staffing vendor. Now
Mm-hmm.
I've got to have people here in the office. I can't have somebody working hybrid. I can't have remote. I can't have any of that. And then, March happened of, was that 2021, 2020? What was that?
2020.
2020.
Yeah.
Yes, 19. So all of a sudden that happens. I start calling up clients, 2 weeks or a month later after the shock and awe had worn off and people realized they need to get back to work.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take people anywhere. I don't care. It was just like
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden these same managers who could not have somebody who wasn't in the office could now go to what we're doing today. And they realized very quickly that I had the CIO from Nutanix on here in the middle of the pandemic, and they realized that they were getting 25% more productivity out of their software engineers working remotely than they did
Mm-hmm.
bringing them into the office. So some industries you still have to have people in the office, no doubt about it. But a lot of the IT folks have figured out that no, they can work from anywhere, and it's been a really eye opener that was on its way to happening anyway. But with the pandemic, with COVID-19, it just kind of fast forwarded it to no, it's happening now.
I mean, look, here's a couple of like little things I've noticed. We all had access to video conferencing well before the pandemic. We were probably all on our 10th, 12th, 15th iPhone. None of us used video the way we're using it today until the pandemic. And it's not like the technology didn't exist. It was always there. So when people were saying you need to be in the office, and I'm a firm believer, make no mistake, I am a firm believer that hybrid is the answer. You do need to be able to collaborate. I think the way the offices look in the future are going to be very different. It's not like, John Pomposello is going to get X amount of square feet for an office and collect tchotchkes from trade shows. I think those days are over. I think offices are going to be much more intent focused on, you go to the office with a purpose because you're meeting with your team, you're working on some projects, and then you're going to work on projects. And there's a time for analog audio calls only, where I don't want to see the same person I've talked to a million times and I want to pace around the room. There's a time that you need to be on video and share your screen. And there's a time you need to be in the office and just sort of collaborate and bullshit and get things done.
Yeah. It was an interesting time. And then this 2 weeks ago, I was out in North Carolina meeting with one of our clients, and walking into some of the big office spaces and seeing pretty much everything empty. There's a few people there working, but most people are working remotely. They still have an office there if they need to come into the office, but it's a pretty normal thing now to walk into large office spaces. And I've got an office out in Phoenix, Arizona that hasn't had one person in it since the beginning of the pandemic.
Well, I'll tell you something, full circle to what I said earlier. I wanted to be a manager because I wanted an office. Even before the pandemic, CBRE really had the vision of this more collaboration type office space. And the way it works is, when you go to the office, you either sign out an office or a desk or a conference room. I never went into an office. In fact, I hate being in an office because you're isolated. I love being on the floor, hearing people, and people can hear me, because when I'm next to people I work with, they're like, oh, you're working with so-and-so client? I didn't even know that. You should blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, I overheard you with this. Or there is something to that collaboration. Now, there's a fine line between collaboration and distraction, but that's what you get in an office.
Now, wanted to move on to something else here that's a big hot topic today, which is cybersecurity.
Yes.
So it's a big critical thing for businesses today. How do you and your team address and incorporate cybersecurity considerations in advising your clients within network infrastructure?
So here's what I've realized today. Most people who sit on the board of directors or C-suites are terrified of cybersecurity. They generally have over-purchased so much stuff that's never been implemented correctly, because they are saying, I don't want to be the man or woman who said no to something and now we have a security breach. And I am finding, once you communicate that effectively to the client, the first step is doing a deep dive due diligence on saying, what's here today? It's like the patient coming into the doctor's office. I got to see what the platform is, because they might have security platforms in one area where they've got 25 steel case beams in front of their front door and the back door is wide open. So the first process is understanding what's there today. That leads to the roadmap, and then that leads to sort of the optimization. And security is very interesting because it's a multitude of different things. It's the network piece of it, it's the human element of it, and then it comes down to the legal aspect of it. How much risk is my company willing to deal with? because you could be so secure no one can get their job done, or you could have a little less security, people get their job done and you're willing to take on risk. So those are the three big moving parts when you're dealing with security.
We've got some consultants that have to log into VPNs, and it's like the steps to even get in and get on the network.
It's like 45 minutes to turn on your computer.
Yeah, exactly. It's like go back to the old days of dial-up. So, couple last questions here. What are some of the emerging trends that you're observing in the real estate industry today?
Well, the biggest thing that and again, I'm biased because I'm coming at this from a technology lens. The biggest trend that I am seeing is the relationship of technology within all forms of real estate. So at one time it was, is this building in the right location? Does it have the right access to public transportation? Does it have the right is it the right proximity to people? All of these other things. Now technology is a major consideration. I mean, this is the first time companies are saying, I need to understand the fiber in and around the buildings I'm considering. How close are they to data centers? Does this adhere to what I'm doing? So will cell phones work in the building? So technology is really becoming this utility part of real estate, and that it's never been this way before.
I want to talk about something I saw in your questionnaire that's near and dear to my heart. That's Def Leppard.
Yes, I've got an interesting.
Okay, what's first of all, what's your favorite album?
Like Def Leppard, Pour Sugar on Me. That album's my favorite.
Hysteria.
Hysteria.
Oh yeah, that album from beginning to end.
The whole thing. So here's what's very interesting. I mean, I'm turning 50 in a couple of months. So I don't know if we're the same age, but
I'm 51. I'll be 52 this year.
Like I remember when I first saw Def Leppard, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want ripped jeans. Like when I first saw that. In fact, when my wife and I got married, we have two wedding songs. We've got our official wedding song, At Last. Like my wife picked out everything. I'm like, I'm going to pick the band. I literally told the band, I'm like, the unofficial wedding song is Def Leppard, Pour Some Sugar on Me. And they played like that was the unofficial wedding song.
That's awesome.
Because when that just hits, when that beat just hits, boom, you just become alive.
No, it's one of the first songs that I'm in an 80s tribute band called the Breakfast Club. And that's one of the first songs that I sing in our show that we do called the 80s Experience.
Yeah.
The place just goes nuts. It just gets people going.
I mean, I would put that guitar opening solo right with like some of the Guns N' Roses "Sweet Child of Mine." I mean, once you hear that guitar and then the drum beat come in,
oh yeah,
bam!
No, that riff. I mean, step inside, walk, and then that guitar riff comes in, and you're just like, yes,
yeah.
But I so recall. I mean, Pyromania was awesome. High and Dry was awesome before that, but Hysteria was just incredible when it came out. I graduated high school in 1990. That came out, I think, a couple years prior to that. And I just remember walking around with my Walkman on at the time and just wearing that album out. It was so freaking good.
That's the other thing. I think artists back then, I mean, first of all, they had to make a solid album. I mean, that's why there was the one-hit wonders, and today it's a whole different world. And I don't even know and I listen to everything. I don't even know if music today is real music. It might be all synthesized or something, but you had to step up. And I remember on Long Island, like the first time I saw someone wearing a leather jacket and Def Leppard was painted on the back of the leather jacket. I'm like, what is this? And the first time I heard it, I'm like, oh my God. And then I remember, and then you fast forward to like Nirvana, and then it's like because then the hair bands were out. I'm like, what is this depressing music?
It was it went from all the hair band, Whitesnake, Winger, all that stuff, and then when it went to Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Soundgarden, all that grunge stuff, still great music. But just I
still listen to Pearl Jam and Nirvana all the time still.
Oh, yeah. It's so good. And it was great growing up in that. I think the difference today is that there's no money for the record companies to put behind artists to let them create things and create albums the way they used to. So now it's like, how can we quickly put out some regurgitated thing that's already been done that we know is going to sound good in a club or on on iTunes, and get the kids to download it real quick, because we don't care anymore. And that's sad.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the flip side of it is so many people can be artists. I mean, today, if you want to be a successful artist, my cousin, who I'm very close to, is a musician, and if you want to be a successful artist, like, you need to write your music, produce your videos, sell millions of copies. Then someone's like, all right, we'll give you a look. Where the days of being discovered are over. You need to make it yourself now.
Yeah. It's a whole different world, and there's good and bad about all of it. But my last question here is the same question I asked to everybody. So we know where the hell you've been. We know what the hell you've done. So where the hell are you going now?
At the end of the year, people start to put together their goals, and I was kind of going back in my journal, and I don't want it to make it seem like I write in a journal all the time, but from time to time I'll write in a journal. And I said when I was 48, by the time I'm 50 years old, I want to be in the best mental, physical, spiritual, and financial shape of my life. And then I want to double it by 60. So that's really what my journey is right now.
That's a good goal. So when do you turn 50?
In April.
Nice. I turned 52 in May. So hopefully you're on that path. And then by the time, maybe we'll talk again when you're 60.
Yes. I'm on track with all of my goals to be 50, and then I'm going to make sure I'm on track to double it by 60.
Awesome. Well, I know it. This has been a great conversation. I think a great podcast. I really want to thank you for joining us today, John. And for everybody who tuned in, either listening or watching, thanks so much for joining us again on the How the Hell Did We Get Here podcast with John Zink. John Pomposello, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
The How in the Hell Did We Get Here podcast is brought to you by IT Avalon. For more information and links to other episodes, please visit johnzinkpodcast.com. We'll see you next time on How in the Hell Did We Get Here?
The future's right now.